Hello, welcome to Downtown. I'm your host, Robbie. Thank you for being here with us. Today I am speaking with Scott Smith, who is Senior Managing Editor with GateHouse Media. I think maybe many of you out there know what GateHouse Media is all about. It's in every town around here. He is Managing Editor of the company's newsroom in Plymouth, editor of the Old Colony Memorial and Wicked Local Plymouth website. And welcome to the show, Scott.
Thank you, Robbie. Thank you very much.
It's been a while, but we finally got here, right?
She's been chasing me for far too long, and it's just one of those things. But she asserted herself the other day, and I do whatever Robbie tells me.
I'm so glad to hear it. So I'm glad to have you here, Scott.
Thank you.
And as is my way of doing things, I'd love to know a little of your background. How you got to be here, what your plan was, and how it worked.
Well, it actually was a plan. I mean, I had been in community journalism for a good while, and I got to know Plymouth, the Plymouth area. I became involved in the Plymouth Area Chamber of Commerce many years ago with my regional business publication that I owned several years ago, and really fell in love with the area. I didn't live here. I lived about an hour away. And circumstances changed, and I sold out my interest in the paper that I co-owned to my partner so that I could take a position with MPG newspapers in Plymouth. And that was in 1999, 20 plus years ago, that I started with the company. And I set my sights on the company, having met the publisher, Phyllis Hughes, and we became friendly, and she was very enticing. And the more I looked into the company, the more I liked. Started up with the company June 1, 1999. Initially as a reporter. Within a year I was an editor. And let's see, that would be 2000. And in 2006, January 1, I became the managing editor of our newsroom at MPG Newspapers. That year, the company was purchased by the company that would become GateHouse Media. And we were merged in with a community newspaper company, which was also purchased to become the core of GateHouse Media in New England. So all of a sudden, I went from a small local company to being part of a growing national corporation. It's one of the largest newspaper companies in the country today.
Really?
Yeah. So we launched, in addition to having the venerable Old Colony Memorial, which is now in its 188th or 9th year, I believe, we launched Wicked Local Plymouth as a website back prior to our merger, shortly prior to the merger. And it proved to be an incredibly popular website. We were getting page views that we just thought were mind-blowing, of 40 and 50 and 60,000 page views a month, and oh my gosh, isn't this amazing? Well, Wicked Local Plymouth does 10 times that now.
Oh my goodness.
The company saw this as a great idea. They loved the Wicked Local concept and created them for all of the community newspapers throughout eastern Massachusetts that the company owned, and there are now well over 100 Wicked Local websites. Wow. Plymouth is still to this day #1. Has been since day one, and as long as I'm at the helm, hopefully will remain so. It's just very, very well established, very readily accepted by our audience, which is always a moving target, as you can imagine. But we work really hard to give a lot of great content, changing it up. I have a staff of 3 reporters, and we have a sports editor and myself. And so we have a lot of good content rolling through the paper and the website at all times. And plus we get involved in regional projects with other newsrooms, and particularly our newsroom in Norwell. We do a lot of collaboration with. And So we're able to use a lot of great expertise in the company, and we have a lot of tremendous journalists. We all have, if we have one thing in common, it's that we all, as we like to say, we all like to commit journalism.
Good. I like that.
Yeah.
Now, each segment has its own specific people, like, what is the name of the one here on the Cape?
Well, in the Cape, we have several publications. The Cape Cod Times is the pappy of them all on the Cape, and there are several weekly newspapers that are operated under the Cape Cod Times banner throughout the Cape. And then we also have a lot of other publications people will be familiar with, the Patriot Ledger in Quincy, the Enterprise in Boston, the New Bedford Standard Times, the Providence Journal, Worcester Telegram.
You're really educating me today. I had no idea it was all part of the GateHouse media.
We go up to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We go down south. We go out to California. And the company has been public in its announcement that it is currently in negotiations to hopefully by the end of the year purchase the Gannett newspaper company, which is actually larger than our company. And if that goes through as is expected, we will become the biggest newspaper company in the entire country.
Wow.
So that gives a lot of advertising power. It gives a lot of ability to save costs through having centralized cost centers for operations departments and so on. And it still allows local newsrooms to act, pretty much independently, and keep that independent spirit. We have, as the industry has, we have suffered the effects of the big recession from a decade ago that's lingered, and we work with smaller staffs now than we used to, and we do more with those smaller staffs. Our websites are full of video that our reporters, whom we now actually call multimedia journalists, because they have to indeed be multi-talented journalists to do what they do.
Right.
Covering events, if we're in place to do so, we'll cover something live via Facebook Live. We'll do video interviews. We have highlights of sports contests that go on our websites. We produce hundreds of videos every year. And that's a very important part of the business. It's a digital world, and most access to what we do digitally is on mobile devices these days. It's not the home desktop or laptop computer as it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And more searches for our website anyway are done through Facebook as versus through search engines. And so we have to be aware of the ever-changing world of technology and keep up with it. The Old Colony Memorial Facebook page has somewhere over 13,000 followers. And it's the biggest one in GateHouse, New England. Our website, Wicked Local Plymouth, we range anywhere from 500,000 to 650,000, 700,000 page views a month, depending on the month and the quality of the news of any given month. So we have a lot of folks tuning in. Plymouth being a hub and being a tourist destination also gets a lot of views from overseas. So when you look at the numbers, most of our numbers, like anywhere, any community website, are going to be generally local. But we have solid numbers from Europe, from Japan, is very sizable, because folks who come here want to tune in to see what's going on, what's in our news, look up through our resources things to do, where to go. They go to our online calendar and catch what's going on.
And of course, with 2020 coming up, there hopefully are going to be a lot of people from around the world coming.
It's anticipated that the number of visitors next year, 2020, the 400th anniversary of the Pilgrims landing in Plymouth and settling, will double the normal tourism flow,
Wow.
at least, if not more. The people who are planning the events have wisely spread them out throughout the year. It's not just one big hurrah at one time where all of a sudden 20 million people are coming into town for one giant event. They're spread throughout the year, which will take off in the spring and run through the end of the year.
Right.
And there will also be events on the Cape, Provincetown, where, of course, the Mayflower initially landed in Provincetown Harbor and stayed there for a few weeks prior to getting over to what they settled as Plymouth. Provincetown is very actively involved in the planning and will have events going on there as part of the formal package, as well as Boston and other communities throughout eastern Massachusetts. And it's kind of interesting, Robbie, in that it's not just Plymouth's 400th anniversary coming up next year, but over the coming years, there are all the other communities that followed Plymouth, and their anniversaries are coming.
Very good.
So we'll have Boston, and we'll have Weymouth, and we'll have Salem, and so on and so forth. And all of these towns and cities will have their celebrations. And so what's expected by the folks who are planning this first celebration is that the movement won't simply stop after next year. It will continue over the coming years and even decades as the Massachusetts seacoast is celebrating the birth of, in essence, what became our nation.
Well, it's amazing that you say that, because I was listening to news or something, and they were talking about Boston is 396 years old. And I said, wait a minute, how can that be? If Plymouth is having its 400th, but of course, it's a progression. It was
Sure.
not, yeah. It's difficult to think of that when you're honing in on Plymouth 400,
Right.
you know? Yeah, but very good. Thank
Right.
you for saying that.
Well,
that
it
will
is.
go
And
on.
Boston's going to be a big part of our celebration. Next year, for example, our Mayflower 2, which has been in Mystic, Connecticut at the seaport, being restored for 3 years. Well, it will be 3 years by next spring when it comes back, completely restored. Most of the timber actually literally replaced at the cost of millions of dollars. But it was a very worthy project that Plymouth Plantation put on. The plantation owns the Mayflower because it is such a tourism draw. It sits at State Pier in Plymouth Harbor, excuse me, and folks flock to it day in and day out throughout the spring, well, and into fall.
By the busloads.
By the busloads is right. Now,
Yeah.
when it is going to leave Mystic, it's going to first go to Boston for a big celebration up there the week before Memorial Day. And then on Memorial Day, we'll sail into Plymouth.
Ah, very good.
And be home again after 3 long years. And we've missed it. We know what an economic engine tourism plays for the town.
Yes.
But fortunately, Plymouth isn't dependent on tourism. It's not a one industry town. And chief among the growth industries is the arts industry.
Yeah.
Plymouth has become an arts destination. We have the Venerable Memorial Hall, which is over a century old and was restored about 15 years ago by the taxpayers at the tune of $5 million, and did a beautiful restoration. And that's the home for the Plymouth Philharmonic Orchestra, which I know you're very familiar with.
Yeah.
And they put on all sorts of concerts and events there. They've had a lot of major league music performers, bands, soloists, and so on over the last couple of years that have been, I mean, just giant names.
And I don't think a lot of people know that it's owned by the town of Plymouth.
It is. It is. It's a public facility. It was built as a veterans hall. And when you go inside, you can see the veterans exhibits. and our local veterans community maintains and operates it, and all volunteer. And they're very, very hardworking, loyal, and really wonderful people. So every time we go to a concert, as we did last Saturday night for the Phil, as we walk through that hallway to the concert hall, then all along the sides and the back rooms are exhibits of the veterans in Plymouth history. But we see the arts as an economic engine, and I'll give you a great example. I was at the concert with my wife Lee and some friends last Saturday night, and our former Senate President Terry Murray came in, and she happened to sit right next to me, and we were chatting, and she said, you know, and she was with a group of 4, and she said, we started just going, we said, let's go out to dinner before the show. We went to one restaurant after another. Every one was packed.
Wow.
And they were hour and a half wait.
Amazing.
And she said, you know, in the old days, you could just walk into one of the restaurants, they'll have a table for 4, and you're sitting down and ordering in minutes. She said, on a Saturday night when there's a concert in town, and in that night there were 2, because there was Memorial Hall with a Phil, but also the Spire Center for Performing Arts, which has been in business for 6 years now and has fabulous concerts. They had a concert going, and downtown was packed with people, and folks typically will go to dinner, enjoy the show, or they'll go and enjoy the show and then afterward go to one of the local places that's so much fun to go. I'll give you an example of one that opened recently that's been a huge draw. And it's interesting to me, especially because the owners originally were going to locate it in another South Shore community, and then had second thoughts and said, no, we're going to Plymouth. And that's Uva Wine Bar.
For goodness sake.
Which is right on Main Street. And Uva Wine Bar, which just opened last spring, is the only self-pour wine bar in the state of Massachusetts.
Really?
And the 2 owners, who are 2 women, they're best friends, they're local, and they saw this in operation and on a vacation they went on together a couple of years ago, and they said, this is a fabulous concept, let's explore it. Well, the long story short, they considered various locations, and they were very close to going, not in Plymouth, when they had those second thoughts.
Okay.
And they made the right decision because they have been busy as can be since opening. We went there after the concert Saturday night, and the place was packed.
Yeah.
And folks were loving it because you can get quarter pours, half pours, and full pours proportionately priced along with the food they offer and so on. So that's just one example of a business that came to town because of what it offered, businesses like that, and how people will take advantage of restaurants and bars and such places when they go out for social events like concerts.
And we certainly don't have a minimum of restaurants in in town.
There are loads. My
There
wife
are
and I
loads.
love to go out. We don't go out often, but when we do, we try to switch it up to a different place each
Very
time.
good.
And so it's just so fun. So where do you want to go tonight? And we'll spend half an hour
Right.
trying to pick. How do you pick?
Very good. Okay. I feel like I'm talking to someone from the chamber here. You're really wonderful. I'm going to ask you a little about the decommissioning of the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station.
Pilgrim Station was built late 60s, began operation in early 70s, was very popular, and to this day among many people in town is a very popular place, an employer of hundreds of people, a provider of clean fuel. But also because of the fact of the energy that it used, the nuclear material, it has a potential danger.
Right.
And it was decided, the long story short, without getting into all the stuff, because all the stuff would take us 3 or 4 hours to walk through, and I don't want to go there. But as to where it is now in the future of it, a couple of years ago, the owner's Entergy at the time decided it made economic sense to close the plant, even though it had received from the NRC a continuation of its license to operate. And
there's
so,
controversy on both sides.
yes, well,
Yeah.
there is indeed, and depending on who you talk to, both sides are, pretty emphatic. But without going into their sides, the fact of the matter now is that the company made a deal with Holtec International to sell the plant to them to do the decommissioning instead of Entergy doing it. And the motivation for Holtec was that they're going to make money out of doing it, and the motivation for Entergy was they wouldn't have to decommission it. Now, Entergy, under federal law, had up to 60 years to actually decommission the plant.
Wow.
That's even longer than the plant operated.
Really?
I know. And
Yeah. There's so many details that.
well, part of the big issue is the storage of the spent waste, because the plan that the federal government had years back, which was to store it down deep inside Yucca Mountain out west, never happened. The funding for that got shot down long ago, and the government fell down on its word to handle the storage issue. So we don't know what the future will bring in terms of storage, but all the people of Plymouth know for now is it's in Plymouth. It's sitting in these giant casks and so on, and they're probably going to be there for a while.
Yeah.
So Holtec said, all right, sell to us, we'll decommission it in 8 years. We'll clean it up, and we'll make land, hundreds of acres of land, available for reuse and repurpose. Well, that sounds good on paper, but there's a lot of questions as to Holtec's ability to carry it out, the degree of seriousness of the company to execute the charge completely, and why, even though the town and the state had requested and received the word that they would be able to have time to talk with the parties prior to the sale and turnover of the plant, and to negotiate whatever they could leverage in terms of payments to the town to keep money flowing and revenue flowing into town. Well, that never happened. The NRC approved the sale without these conversations taking place. The Attorney General just recently, last week, filed suit trying to block this from going forward, and right now it's a big mess.
To be continued.
To be continued. Okay.
My next question to you is, tell me about some new topics that stand out with you.
Well, we've talked about Plymouth 400 and tourism, and tourism to me is just that knight in shining armor for what it's done for the town.
Right.
The power plant will remain a topic for quite a while, but the topic that strikes closest to home to me and to more and more and more and more people is the whole topic of opioid addiction. Plymouth and all communities have been really hammered by opioid addiction. Plymouth more so than other communities. Over the last several years, we've seen a growing overdose rate and overdose death rate. Last year, it actually turned down a little bit. The overdose death rate turned down a little, but it's come back this year. We're somewhere in the mid-teens right now of deaths so far this year due to overdose. A big part of that is driven by the presence of fentanyl, which is a synthetic drug that is 50 times more powerful than heroin.
Wow.
It used to be heroin, and that was horrible. But now
Yeah.
fentanyl is making it all worse. Sometimes it's cut into the heroin, sometimes it's sold as is, and people often don't get more than one chance on it before overdosing. And the whole area of addiction is such a huge one. We've all dealt for years with alcohol addiction, with tobacco addiction, with all these other various chemical addictions. Addiction, I think for a lot of people, I know it did for me, is something that's kind of over there until such time as when it actually strikes home. And the topic of addiction, if I can go off on a personal note for just a minute,
Please.
really struck home with my family 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago now. I didn't know until this event happened that my daughter suffered depression, and I didn't know that she suffered anxiety. I didn't know that she had lost her health care benefits and lost her insurance, and that she had resorted to self-medicating with alcohol.
Oh, dear.
I had no idea this was going on. As close as I am to her, this is how things work. My daughter became terribly depressed. She felt the worst she's ever felt in her life, and the only resolution to feeling so bad, she made apparent in her attempt to take her life.
Oh, my.
And I got that call from her mother. They rushed to the hospital where she was, which was an hour away from where I was, and saw my daughter hooked up to all these tubes and so on, and being out of it. She had been found by a friend and who called 911.
And she survived it, hopefully?
She did survive it, but she attempted it a second time a few months later.
Oh, dear.
Because she thought she could really regain control of herself and drink moderately, which, as is typical of a lot of alcoholics, it doesn't work. And she fell right back down into that deep canyon of despair.
I'm so sorry to hear that, Scott.
That she experienced, and she attempted to take her life a second time. Well, addicts won't ever do anything about it until they hit rock bottom and they realize that they have a choice to make. They either want to live or they want to die. Choose.
Mm-hmm. And there is an opioid addiction group in Plymouth, I do believe.
Yes, the Plymouth Police Department and other police departments throughout the county have created a program where they provide assistance to folks that they call on. When they get 911 calls and they go to deal with an addict, they'll use Narcan typically to revive a person who's suffering an overdose. And they will return the next day with a social worker and offer state services to help them, if they choose to help them work at overcoming their addiction. In my daughter's case, she didn't suffer opioid addiction and alcohol addiction, but she made the decision she wanted to live. And she sought help, she sought therapy, she started going to meetings, which she still does. She sees a therapist regularly still. She started working out, she started eating well. She decided, oh my God, what have I done? And
Wonderful.
she is 5 years sober. She's thoroughly embraced sobriety.
Excellent.
She's lost all that sloppy, druggy, bad habit weight. She's in great shape. She's beautiful. She's full of energy and life.
What a good story, Scott.
And as you know, one of the resources I remember reading about addiction said, suicide is so often the permanent answer to a temporary situation.
Very well put.
And if folks can grasp that and know that there is help, there is the opportunity to overcome, then they can turn it around. But
Excellent.
it's very, very difficult. And my family is deeply blessed for my daughter's good health. She's the love of my life. My wife, Lee, just adores her. I remarried a couple of years ago, almost 2 years ago, be 2 years on New Year's Eve, after having been single for almost 2 decades. And
Amazing. You
yeah.
surprised many people, Scott.
And Lee and I were both single for a long time, but she is just so loving and sweet and kind, and she adores my children. I have grown son as well as daughter, and as I do her son, and who's married, and she has a wonderful daughter-in-law. And we don't have grandchildren yet, but we have 2 granddogs. So we've got one step into the grandparent world.
Going in the right direction.
That's right.
Well, this has been wonderful. I think it's a wonderful note to end on, because we are just about at the end, believe
Already?
it or not.
How did that
Already.
happen?
I don't know, but it does.
You just steer a good ship, Robbie.
And you are just such a joy for me to have on the show, and I thank you for that.
Well, it's my pleasure. I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a bunch of years now,
Yeah.
and I can't remember when or how we met, but I am so grateful that we did.
And I also. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Robbie.
And for you out there, thank you so much for tuning into Downtown. You know that we come to you from Sandwich Community TV. I like to remind people of that because of our name change and many other things that have gone on in the past couple of years. I am hoping to see you again real soon.